how to avoid a double center of gravity. And this more specifically refers to the psychological or spiritual, which is essentially the same thing in Gnostic psychology. The word psychology coming from the word psyche, originating from the word soul. Psyche meaning soul. So the psychological phenomenon of a double center of gravity, pointing to this internal struggle between two opposing psychological forces. So what is a double center of gravity? Generally speaking, and if you've been watching the videos, if you've dabbled into the Gnostic teachings somewhat, there are a lot of students here with different levels of progression, and so there are some beginner students and advanced students. But generally speaking, we discuss a lot about different egos, and we study and observe individual egos. I have an ego of this and I have an ego of that, right? I have an ego that would like to become this when I'm older, and I have an ego that worries about the past. I have this insecurity, I have this fear, I have this anger, and different egos of angers in different situations, etc., right? Thousands, right? So each of those egos has its own center of gravity. But here we're saying how to avoid a double center of gravity. So we're looking at two centers of gravity, right? Not two egos, but I'm just making the distinction clear here, and in this specific teaching, which we're clarifying. So each ego has its own center of gravity. For example, we have an ego that one day promises to love the love of our life forever, but later on it's replaced by an entirely different ego that wants to love someone else, right? Or more commonly and more relatably in this kind of group, we have an ego that pledges to do the spiritual practices, but then we're later replaced by an ego that doesn't care at all, right? We just want to do the worldly things. We want to drink alcohol. We want to go to clubs and pubs and party and all of that, right? We completely forget about the other ego because we've been replaced by a different ego. It's not necessarily that we've forgotten, but that we have become an entirely different person, psychologically speaking. So each of these egos has a certain force, and this is a spiritual, psychological force, and each one has its own power to attract and magnetize its desires. You might recall in the chakra series that our egos use the power of our soul to magnetize, to manifest all the situations, the dramas, and our life situation, our karma, right? Everything in our life. And in terms of this teaching here, to give perspective, you could imagine a planet with many orbiting moons. The planet itself is the desire. This is the center of the gravity. And it's the desire which is the fuel for the gravity. And all the things orbiting around it are the thoughts, the emotions, fantasies, thinking, etc. These are the objects of our desires, or desires. The things that we want, or what our egos want. So, these objects, of course, are rooted in our attachment to materialism, attachment to the external world, the material world, how our consciousness is lost and identified in this outward external reality. There's many lists here, but I've put here, money, fame, relationships, status, power, possessions. All of those kinds of things are what keeps us asleep. So you can see here, to help, that generally each ego could look something like this, right? A planet with its many desires. Each ego sort of having its own brain, its own emotions, its own wants and needs. We have an ego that wants to become this kind of person and live this kind of life. But later we have another ego that wants to live another kind of life. Today I want to be a Buddhist and live in a temple and be vegan and all of this. A year later, I renounce all that and I live in the West in the middle of a city and have a life getting a job and becoming a corporate leader, etc., etc. We're not saying any of this is bad. We're studying and understanding our human condition, our psychological state that we are in right now. Now, another way you can see this image on the screen is that this planet in the middle is our ego, our accumulation of all our ego. And all the orbiting things around it are all of our different, many thousands of sub-egos, let's say. Okay. All of our desires, our life stories, everything. Okay. So just to use your imagination a little bit there. So, if we want to get in touch with this practical wisdom, the practical wisdom side of this teaching, and really reflect and penetrate into what is actually causing these sort of alien, psychologically identified desires and attachments, we can start to feel that it's in the heart. The heart determines the center of gravity. This whole spiritual awakening path, it's always the heart against the heart. Spiritually, we don't just have one heart, but we have many hearts, always being replaced by another, by another, by another. Not really having one heart with commitment. So desire, whether conscious or unconscious, positive or negative, is found in the heart. This is why the great Master Jesus said, for example, when it comes to lust, that lust does not begin with any outward actions in relation to lust. So lust doesn't begin when you start to kiss someone, you start to flirt with them, but no, lust already began in the heart. It begins with an error in the heart. So if we're already in a relationship, for example, and we start to feel so lustful towards another person, we desire them, we can't stop looking at the physical features of them, we're already committing lust. We're already cheating, psychologically, okay? Emotionally, inwardly, internally. So, as it says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So, anytime we hold a specific ego, not just lust, we have a certain type of gravity with its own type of magnetism. And if we're not careful, if we don't choose a conscious life where we want to awaken, then those egos stay in the subconscious. And whether consciously or unconsciously it happens, at some point that ego can come out and manifest whatever it wanted. Whether it's lustful, whether it's, we all have our own set of psychological unconsciousness, psychological defects, unconscious desires, unchecked parts of our negative parts of our psyche. So here we get to the more specific teaching of the double center of gravity. There's two polar forces, two sides to this. So we just discussed that there are many egos, but now let's conceptualize this into the fact that the ego just at the heights of spiritualization, it has one figure, let's say, the head, the guardian head serpent of the ego, which is the whole accumulation of all the multiplicity, the thousands of aspects of our ego, the little egos and the big egos, the big sins, the little sins, everything that keeps us asleep, all our different negative ways of being, our laziness, our pride, our gluttony, all of this. So, as it said here, in the beginning we look at many egos, but later we acquire a sense of the egoic force itself. The ego is the head of the legion within. So we sense the ego itself with its main center of gravity, this part that gets lost, this part of, sometimes we're walking the path, we're meditating, we feel good. Later on, we get consumed by the external world, lost in distractions, in false senses of psychological identifications, right? Everything. I'm this person with this name, this age. I follow this, I follow that. I believe this, etc. Until, we start to suffer, we start to find some light again. That's how it is. The other center of gravity is the essence. And hopefully you've seen the video on past lives where it's explained quite simply there about ego and essence. The essence, another word for essence is consciousness, but we use the word essence in the Gnostic teachings because it's a more effective word, it's a more compelling word that points to the spiritual reality of it. The essence is the pure light of us. The essence can be seen when in a child and in a baby. The virtues and all the good things about us are seen when we are children and when we're maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, until the ego starts to come in, and then we start seeing the bad side of us, the negativities, the egos that keep the essence asleep. And it's only until, generally speaking, in humanity, most people are operating from the ego, and there's not a lot of light to be seen. You can even look in the face of someone and not see so much light. Until, usually, really, mainly, the most of the time when you start to see the essence again is when someone falls in love. And not just falling in love as in just dating, lust, sex, Tinder, right? But real love, something profound in the heart, in the soul. Then you start to see the essence again. And of course, this relates to sexual transmutation, white tantra, etc. We'll go into that more later. So one is a centripetal force, a force that moves inwards. Okay, this double center of gravity teaching here. A force that moves inwards. And the other is a centrifugal force, moving outward to the external material world. So these are terms in physics. So we'll see more about those forces in a little later. So just to give some visual representation, you can see a saint here with the many egos. We all experience this to some less or more degree, especially when we start practicing, that we can develop ourselves into sort of good people. We start to walk the path somewhat, but we still sense our heaviness of egos always trying to pull us around. But here we're more looking at also the essence. Right. The essence pointing to our being, which also points to the different aspects of our being. God, the Father, the Mother, the Divine Mother, the Christ. Okay, and you can see here the essence as the Christ has command, the power to overcome the internal legion, the internal negativities of the mind. And here you can see the essence killing the dragon, right? The head of the dragon. And that is related to this double center of gravity teaching. The dragon against the essence, the purity, the consciousness. Which one will triumph? So these are inward and outer forces. Right. Is our energy going inwards and evolving? Or is it going outwards, lost, weak, into the distractions of life? And that relates to our sexuality too. Are we going inwards or are we going outwards? So the centripetal force represents this inward journey towards the center of our being, towards self-realization, awakening, and spiritual enlightenment. The centrifugal force symbolizes the outward movement of consciousness toward the external world, towards materialism, distractions, illusions, the force that pushes us away from our inner essence, trapping us in the cycle of desires, recurring lives, attachments, ego, desperation, etc. So here, this is a very good visual representation of this, of understanding this. As you can see, I forgot what the sport is called, right? But in Olympics, when they swing the heavy ball around, right, and then they release it. Right, this is like how long or how far you can throw a ball. Basically, you can sort of see the degeneration of the ego symbolized in certain sports. How far can someone shoot their ball? How far can someone shoot their sperm, right? How far can someone shoot their energy into the material world? And everyone will clap and congratulate and cheer on that person who has the biggest ego, basically. Right? Someone said shot put in the chat. Yeah, maybe. So now just visualize we're not actually letting go of the ball, but we're just swinging it. And there's two forces when you're going in circles. The centripetal force and the centrifugal force. There's a tension that wants to go inwards and there's a tension that wants to go outwards. Are we going to harness that energy for transmutation, for alchemy? Or are we going to just let it out and go out? And in the middle there is this path of inertia, this inertia here, which is a sort of a spiritual dizziness too, or lethargy. And this is what we feel when we are indecisive. We don't know what to do with our life. We're feeling bogged down, depression. We're not really sure about ourselves, about our life, etc. Okay. And of course, this is an orbit here. You can see that in the middle is the center of gravity. And the heart is not quite decided on what it's doing yet. Is it going in? Is it going out? Sometimes it goes in, sometimes it goes out. Right? It's good, something good to reflect on. So in the path of Gnosis, of awakening consciousness, one must learn to harness the centripetal force to awaken consciousness and transcend the centrifugal forces that keep us bound to the material world, to illusions. If we don't do this, we experience great inertia. At some point, most of humanity is quite generally happy, enjoying entertainments, technology, enjoying life, right? But at some point, midlife crisis, old age, etc., we start to sense that inertia. There's a lot more people these days, younger people now. We're already feeling that. And that relates to this Kali Yuga that we're in. And actually that a lot of us are quite old souls and that we've already suffered quite a lot in past lives. So we already sense this inertia. There's a vertigo of the soul. Where do we go? What do we do? I need to fix this, right? I'm so tired of just throwing myself out mindlessly into the world. We need to find a different path. Not through religions, not through science, not through politics, etc., but find that inward path of individuality, of finding ourselves, finding God within. So this is a state of spiritual lethargy and stagnation that prevents inner growth and awakening of consciousness. This inertia is caused by the accumulation of our defects, egos, addictions, attachments that just weigh us down. And this is a state of humanity today. And we keep adding onto that inertia with our many addictions, drugs, sex abuse, alcohol, etc. Basically in a desperation to avoid dealing with this inertia. Ignorance of this inertia. So these two opposite forces are always battling. When we move inwards, the force to go back out becomes stronger. For example, when we tell ourselves, I'm going to do this meditation, right? I'm going to follow this path, follow these teachings. But later we stop doing it. Something comes along without us knowing really that just stops us. We get lost. We come off the path. So something helpful to reflect on in your practice is, instead of merely relying on or affirming, I will do this, right? I will do that. And I think a lot of people fall into this, of trying to watch like motivational videos and they feel pumped and feel determined, right? It's good to have determination, but intelligent determination is what we need. Mindfulness, analyzing everything. So instead of merely affirming I will, it's helpful to meditate on will itself. And this is an important teaching here, to get in touch with this causal level of our being. Meditate on will itself. So, for example, hold on. Why am I going to do this? For what purpose? What happens if I don't? Am I just doing it for spiritual ambition, for spiritual experiences, astral projection? I want to ooh, have psychic powers, telepathy. I want to be able to, go and see other planets, etc., right? Greed for spiritual powers, for pride, vanity, guilt, maybe, insecurity, right? We can tell ourselves we're going to do something because we want to cover something in our unconsciousness. Oh, I'm going to be this great spiritual master, but really subconsciously it's because we're deeply insecure and deeply fearful of what we thought of ourselves before that. We're not processing unconsciousness. So, as you may have seen on other videos, in order to ascend, we first have to descend, right? And if we meditate on will properly, why am I doing this? For what purpose? What happens if I don't? Then we can see, now I see the right reasons, the true reasons, and we become more conscious, more mindful of why we should do something. We have better reason, better emotion, etc. And the more we feed one type of will, either the ego or the essence, the stronger it also gets. So there's a force that when someone's going downwards and outwards, if ego, actually it's very hard to start to evolve back upwards, right? Instead of degenerating, to start regenerating again. It's actually very difficult. A lot of the time when we think that we're regenerating, actually we're still on the outward force again. Still, we don't quite understand. All of these teachings. We can talk so many about all these different teachings. The main thing is dissolve the ego and transmute your energy. That's really what we need. If we're not doing that, it's very difficult. So, this is also, this might seem difficult, but this is a necessary part of awakening. It relates to teachings of initiation, the test of the heart, the test of Kundalini. As you've heard many times, Kundalini raises according to the merits of the heart. Our being tests us whether we are truly willing and want to walk the path to awaken our consciousness. And this requires, of course, non-resistance to suffering. So we, again, as we said before, in what way are we walking the path? To avoid pain, to avoid suffering? This isn't quite correct. We have to realize that in our current condition of consciousness, integrating suffering is part of life. It's part of awakening. You cannot walk the path by avoiding suffering. This only creates more ignorance and more pain. This is what will make us into real human beings and not just ignorant people trying to live an ignorant life. Trying to find, even if we do find happiness, it's going to be very superficial and shallow. So, such a person who acts in this way, tries to cover all their suffering, always eventually lets their centrifugal force, their ego, take over them, because they lack the inward centripetal force. For example, this is common in Gnostic teachings. For 2 weeks, they act as a white magician. For the next 2 weeks, they become a black magician. They fall and rise constantly. All the oaths and promises we made to ourselves and to divinity and to God to be perfect are totally overtaken by everything inside them that never wanted that. Right? So there's a pendulum. So another nice image here, just to reflect on. The blue is the essence. The red is the ego. There's an outer circle here representing our 100% consciousness. And the blue, well, to get to this stage would be nice for all of us. This would be very profound, to have 50% ego and 50% essence. The reality is that this blue circle, the consciousness, the real being here, is actually very small, about 3%. We're mostly in a lot of darkness with unconsciousness. So this is related to the battle of the wills, two different wills at the causal level. Causal energy. What is causal energy? This is energy that is superior to thought and emotion. So we need to reflect on and understand how to start working at a causal level. Usually we lack the profundity and we lack the understanding to work at this level. People usually work at just thoughts and emotions. Oh, if I have the correct thoughts, I'm going to be better. If I have the correct emotions, I'm going to be better. Of course, we need those correct emotions and thoughts, the right action, right? But we need to not still be identified with that. What would be better is to understand our will. Because it's the causal body, the causal part of consciousness that determines what thought and emotion we will have. So we can have good thoughts, bad thoughts, etc. And we might think they're good. We might be very genuinely sincere, thinking that everything we think is good and right and helpful to others. But actually, when we really profoundly analyze the origin of the will of such thoughts, they're actually evil and they're rooted in ignorance. They lack profundity because they come from the obscured centrifugal ego. They originate from the conditioned consciousness. Something very, very deep to consider and reflect on. That we're mistaken. Actually, most self-realized masters made many mistakes throughout their life. This is normal. We have to understand that we're going to make many mistakes. And this is okay. Nothing wrong with it. We have to realize that we're quite mistaken and we're going to be mistaken quite a lot, and that's okay. If we understand our mistakes, this is the best thing. We can start to gradually take a better path. So these different I's, these different me, these different egos battle for victory over the human machine. They love the human body. They love the material, physical, human flesh of the body. Because inside our body is stored great light, is stored God, is stored the power in the chakras, the vitality, the sexual energy, the divine, sacred sexual energy. It's all there. But we have thieves, the thieves of the mind that come in and they want to take it. Like Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves who steal the treasure. That's why these psychological entities like to live inside us and perpetuate a sleeping planet on this planet. So we don't ultimately improve ourselves by thinking better thoughts or having better emotions. Yes, we need that, but rather by developing superior will, conscious, cognizant, self-realized will that comes from our being, our intuition. So you can see here a nice diagram from Glorian about the human machine. The three brains here. We have the intellect, many egos in our intellect, many thoughts throughout the day, many, many, many. And the emotions, we have so many different types of emotions, different emotional reactions. And we have the physical body, which is the motor, instinctive body, which, we might be thinking certain thoughts in our intellect at one moment and also having an emotional, sentimental feelings, maybe listening to music. And then also at the same time, while we do all of that at the same time, our body gets up because it's hungry, So we have this split in our three brains too, and each one has all different types of egos. It's literally three different brains. The purpose of Gnosis is to harmonize these three brains, illuminate them, and the impressions that we get from our senses, including our imagination, trigger these egos too, and provoke them, depending on the different senses that we're getting. And sometimes if we don't get certain senses, the ego will become intensified in the certain brains to possess the body to make it do certain things. So we have to realize we're not our body, we're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions, we're not even the will. We're not our egos. We are our being. We have a true being. This points to Pinocchio. This person here has strings attached, and the strings are being controlled by the ego, the mechanical ego. And we're really like that because, simply put, we're not also honest with ourselves. That's why Pinocchio stays like a mechanical robot, because he keeps lying to himself and lying to others. Deluded. Pinocchio only becomes a real boy when he's honest. So the permanent center of gravity, that's what we need. That's what we strive towards. And only the essence is capable of a permanent center of gravity. The essence, which is eternal in nature, in its origins. The consciousness. That which has no beginning, which has no end. It was there before our birth, and it's there after we die. Until then, if we don't have the awakened essence, we're never the same person. And this is something we have to observe with a lot of humility and sincerity and honesty. That we're always changing from moment to moment to different eyes. We don't have this consistency in being the same person. Maybe you talk to a friend or a family member and you want to ask them something, maybe a favor, but you have to wait until they're in the right mood, right? And that's because basically you're waiting for them to be the version or the person of them that you like, that you know that will say yes to your favor, right? So the ego is attached to the external world. It throws itself, using the power of the essence, centrifugally into the material. It adores the material. It believes in the material as God. We all essentially worship a God. It's either material or it's spiritual. Of course, the material world points to all of those gods that are symbolized by the material world, In very old Gnosticism, this is related to the demiurge. And everything material is impermanent. It's impermanent. It dies. Eventually. So as it's said also by Jesus in the Bible, do not store up treasures for yourself on earth. Do not store consciousness, your essence, on earth. Don't bottle up your essence in the egos of attachment in the material. Because here, they will be destroyed by moth and rust. They will die eventually. Where thieves, different other egos, will just break in and steal it. Rather, store up your treasure, your consciousness in heaven, in the internal superior worlds of the heavens, of consciousness, of the being, the eternal realms beyond time, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves cannot break in and steal, where the ego cannot exist. Do not identify with time. Store your consciousness in eternity. So as Master Samael says, Samael on Vior, and this relates, this is all inspired from his teachings, especially in the chapter on the permanent center of gravity in the revolutionary psychology. It is impossible to have continuity of purpose without true individuality. Therefore, if the psychological individual does not exist, if many persons live within each of us, if there is no responsible person within, it would be absurd to demand continuity of purpose from someone. So true individuality only comes from self-realization through the death of the ego. The essence, the consciousness, awakens through unbottling the essence from being trapped in the many egos. Then there is the blossoming of the true individuality. The blossoming of that essence that we saw in the child that was meant to become a real man or woman, not just many mechanical, animalistic, chaos, internal chaos inside it with many problems. So, some solutions or reflections to reflect on here. We need conscious cognizance of what the ego is within oneself. Not just to study the ego or have some concept of it, but to really see it directly in our waking life. To identify really what keeps us asleep, what we're spending our centrifugal energy on, that keeps us basically tired, without enough energy to realize the spiritual reality of things. And then not just see those egos, but also consciously remove them. Remove those false elements. You see something that is wrong, stop doing it. Comprehend it. Dissolve it. It's very easy if you can really comprehend it. And if you're transmuting your energy, it's actually quite straightforward. And you'll find a lot of happiness, a much more healthier and superior sense of self, sense of being. Most people cannot change because they don't understand how to. And then they justify negative ways of being. But really, subconsciously, they know that it's not right. Or that it's keeping them unhappy. So we have to deeply comprehend the causes of our actions, our thoughts and feelings, and how they harm ourselves and others. We need to also develop compassion and understand the intelligence of our conscience, which is the guiding voice from our being. Anytime that we feel we're doing something wrong, even slightly, we should look at that. Give attention to that. Why are we feeling conflicted about it? Usually we just justify very quickly, this is okay, because of this and that. No. There's something there to look at. Something to work on internally. So, as I just said, anytime we feel slightly bad, conflicted, guilty, shameful, embarrassed, angry, lustful, prideful, those are things to observe and strive to understand how this causes suffering and keeps us asleep. This means we will start to gain self-knowledge If we just have the courage to look at ourselves, it's quite easy. Yes, it's hard, but over time it gets easier once we practice. And for this, we also need more force. We need sexual transmutation and or white tantra. Hopefully you've seen the videos on that. The distinction between sexual transmutation and white tantra is with a partner to engage in the sexual act, but without orgasm. This gives us great energy. If we're single, we do sexual transmutation. We do pranayama. We can, and in both cases, we must have this commitment to dissolving the ego, because if we do, our sexual energy will be used to dissolve the ego. It's this also known as the spear of eros, the spear of the erotic energy that can kill those things that we no longer want, all of our sufferings, all of our confusions. Symbolically, this is also related to the Divine Mother, who really dissolves it for us through love, this loving, sacred sexuality that is raised within our being, our chakras, our kundalini. So the orgasm, this is a good thing to reflect on and a good teaching here. The orgasm is the biggest amplifier which keeps us binded to the material world. The orgasm being material, being physical-based gratification, physical, material, external, centrifugal force that we follow, and that's the force falling out of us. If we transmute the energy, we start to make it go inwards and upwards. It's clear that also the emotional center will awaken, the astral body, the emotional body. And it's likely that we'll start to also go through various emotional crises. It doesn't have to be that way. We talk a lot about conscious suffering and all of this. It doesn't have to be that way. But it's hard when we have so much ego. Maybe if we're very skilled in meditation and we practice very well, sure, we don't need too much suffering. But generally, this is the way it is, if we're being realistic and honest. So we'll start to develop our emotions, profound emotions. For example, a person who commits crimes, but a murderer, let's say, an extreme example, a rapist, right? A person who commits crimes has no feelings, has no conscience. But if he transmutes his energy, develops his emotional body, actually maintains the ability to stop orgasm, he starts to get in touch with this emotional center, the superior emotional center. And he'll actually start to feel and understand the reality of his actions. And he'll start to change because he understands it. He starts to become a different person. It's false to believe awakening happens without great struggle and efforts. We need to make effort. Not effort in the sense of, I'm going to be a warrior and tense my muscles and feel like, some kind of sentimental way. No, this is quite egoic. We're talking about effort from the consciousness, to be awake here and now. As you're listening to this, you can even practice it now, just to be awake here and now. Stop daydreaming, look around. Okay, we're conscious in that moment. Now just maintain that. And just be aware and mindful of all the ego that comes in. Okay? And then you'll instinctively start to meditate then. You don't have to worry no longer about meditating because you'll see the need to do it. Because you'll see, I actually can't stay awake very well or for very long. But if I meditate, I start to see that I can start to stay awake for longer during the day, maybe more astral experiences, etc. So some more common confusions here with this. Many people think that the ego is okay to have, that it cannot be dissolved, that we can take care of it gently and love it, etc., etc. These people, they don't know what the ego is. They have not discovered it consciously for themselves in a comprehensive way, and they don't understand that it's a result of ignorance, that it is simply the shadow of the being, shadow of the light. Of course, they're going to defend it because they're living in it. They're identified with it. It's their whole sense of existence. Without it, they would feel dead. We're here in these teachings to say, no, it's okay, Stop identifying with it. And then what's left? Well, at first, they'll feel a great emptiness, a great darkness, loneliness, etc. But eventually, if they persist, they'll start to get in touch with their being, something much more valuable. So anyone who discovers the ego, and also the essence, the being, in a real and direct way, understands that it's not part of their true identity. And it's not needed, When people express these confused statements, they're usually full of pride, selfishness, self-love, self-pity, and filled with a desire to protect their false sense of security and identity. We're not slandering here, pointing fingers. This is just the reality of humanity. We also can see this reflected in ourselves to many degrees too, when we reflect on our own ego. These people think that their ego protects them from suffering because in the internal worlds, in the astral, whatever you want to call it, their ego tricks them and manipulates them through the adulteration of the word. In other words, the manipulation, or it is manipulated, dishonest logic. Okay. So I say the word because we all have the word within us, meaning the ability to communicate and express things. Our word is a type of magic. They cast spells, right? And not just outwardly, but more importantly, inwardly. How we live internally. And we all have the word which creates the world. As it's said in Genesis in the Bible, right? In the beginning was the word, and then the world was basically created, right? It's the same thing internally. This is an internal teaching. It's so exoteric, so just lost knowledge that religious people today think that, there's a God in the sky, he said something and it created the universe. We have to develop an internal mind and really understand this teaching. The word created or creates our internal world. And we have to be very careful and meditate and pray deeply within ourselves and have deep honesty and sincerity to really see how we are creating our inner world. If we really want to understand, of course, the teachings of ego, of essence, of awakening consciousness. So the ego does not want to die. Right? The ego is based in the material. And in the material world is impermanent. Everything in the material dies eventually. So, of course, if someone is telling them to accept this teaching, they'll obviously react, argue, and defend themselves passionately. So these people, and we said this before, in humanity, we're generally happy in our own ignorance, in a state of spiritual latency. We think that the world is okay as it is, and that we're okay as we are. And that's it, of course, until some suffering comes. We're quite, in a way, with physical life, we're sort of blessed with a grace to enjoy certain things for a certain period. But as we just said, ego is not everlasting life. It's impermanent, temporary. And once that's gone, we're just faced with the stark reality. Usually, these kinds of people, they don't see their own errors, they see no reason to change, and they don't see how their state of sleeping consciousness perpetuates ignorance and suffering on this planet. We're getting to a point in this age of Aquarius, in this current age, where everyone needs to make a choice to maintain, perpetuate, and continue this old earth, or make a choice to change internally and start to resonate with the new earth. And as I just said, when it comes to those people to face a big challenge in life, they're lost. They're weak. Because true strength, spiritual strength, comes from the essence. If we develop our essence, all the problems in life, it's no problem for us to deal with. But if someone betrays us, we're going to judge them. We're going to get lost. We're going to get angry. When we want to drop an addiction, we won't know how to do it. If someone insults us, we react violently. We never feel genuine remorse for our actions because we feel justified and identified with our life and our thoughts and our feelings. We believe we are our thoughts and our feelings. Ego is a product of the material world. So remorse. If we want to move towards a permanent center of gravity, we have to understand remorse. This is when we consciously realize how our actions, desires, egos, fantasies are causing suffering in ourselves and for others. How these internal elements are against our true nature. It's against the true happiness of our soul, of living the life we really want, that the being really wants to give us. That doesn't mean being rich, famous, admired, all of this. It could be that our being really wants to live in the middle of nowhere in a poor hut somewhere. All of our lives has a specific role to play, specific purpose. And that looks different for everyone, according to our own specific nature, the nature of our being. We all have different, let's say, aptitudes within ourselves, different colors of our essence. So when we start to change, when we start to awaken the essence, we start to live more permanently in the center of gravity. So of course, if we're living our life asleep, acting on reactions, spiritual laziness, being dishonest, it all leads to the centrifugal river, let's say. So we need to learn radical honesty, radical sincerity, and radical remorse. A revolution of our consciousness. And this is not guilt. It's not self-condemnation. No. That comes from a negative part of a religion. Being, quite related to the word sin. Nothing wrong with the word sin. It means error, to make mistakes. But we have this negative part of the emotional brain that thinks that if we feel so much guilt and so much self-condemnation, that then we'll change, we'll punish ourselves. It's like whipping ourselves, right? This doesn't work. We need consciousness. We need conscious cognizance, full understanding, full self-realization of the wrongdoings. To be awake, not just still crying about it. It's okay to have a little bit of guilt, to feel bad, to suffer a little bit, to cry. That's good in a way, to feel. It's like when you have a child and the child makes a mistake and it comes crying to the parents and says, I made this mistake, I'm so sorry. And the parent will say, good boy, good girl. You admitted your mistake. You saw how bad it is. And now you have the opportunity to act in a better way. And that's good, But to stay identified with that, the guilt and the self-condemnation is useless. It's ego. Don't make it part of your sense of self. And when we reflect on humanity today, our place in this universe, generally speaking, the fact that we're already asleep should already be enough reason to feel some amount of remorse. So we have to realize that we're not our desires, we're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions, we're not even our will. We're not even our consciousness. We're not this conscious awareness. Even when we say, okay, I'm not these thoughts, I'm the awareness of the thoughts. You're not even the awareness of the thoughts. That's your consciousness. Actually, beyond that is your being. Your being, your real being. That enables you to have consciousness, enables you to have the life of consciousness. It unfolds for you and gives you and allows you to have this existence. It's your being. It's what we call God. So we are that intelligence infinitely superior and profound in comparison to even consciousness. So when we stop identifying our life mindlessly, we get more in touch with our being, the higher intelligence that we need to learn to surrender to and let the correct thoughts and emotions and actions flow through us. And that's when we start to love our inner divinity. We start to trust in life. We start to have faith. We get this superior religious feeling. To stop calculating and being fearful of everything in life and to trust that our being will act through us. And that we stay present more in the present moment. And that anytime any problem in life or challenge comes, that we'll be able to do it because we believe. We believe in God. We believe that we can do it in our inner God nature, let's say. So for this, we need, of course, self-knowledge. We need to study in this way of how we've been studying here. To know the good in ourselves, to see the virtues, to see the essence, and also to see the evil, to see what's false, what's wrong, what is harmful, what is degenerate. Without that distinction, we remain confused in inertia. Sometimes we throw things that are good out, and sometimes we take things in that are bad. We need to meditate and understand the ego and the essence, not just in teachings, but within ourselves. Sometimes we say, that there's something very good about ourselves, and suddenly we come to these teachings and say we don't need any ego, so we will remove that virtue from ourselves. We're confused. We didn't understand ourselves. And sometimes we think there's a very bad thing about us, but actually it was quite good. So this is very tricky. And so there's another quote from the Bible here. I'll just read it first. I know your works. Jesus is talking here. The Christ. Jesus symbolizing the inner Christ, the being talking to us, right? The voice of our conscience. And he says, I know your works. I know who you are. That you're neither hot or cold. But I tell you, it's better to be hot or cold. If you're in the middle, right? If you're lukewarm, neither hot or cold, I'll spit you out. Basically, I won't be with you. Me, the being, the inner Christ, the Christ consciousness, I'm not going to be with you. Or basically, we're saying it to the Christ. Because the Christ is all loving, all compassionate. It's us basically saying, I deny the Christ because I haven't made a choice to be with him. So you can see here, this inertia is lukewarm. Be hot. If you want to be hot, be hot. Kill the ego and awaken your consciousness. You're going to see and have a true great happiness. And you're going to start to really awaken your consciousness. You're going to have spiritual experiences. Or if you don't want to do that, well, then choose your path. Go cold, go into the ego. At least then you're going to understand what true suffering and true ego is, true ignorance. Maybe you'll have some kind of chance of coming back to the Christ. But if you're in the middle, you're just ignorant and you're not learning anything. Right? So, the Christ requires this full commitment to the death of Satan. In Christian terms, Satan. Satan is ego. Right? We can't say, I'll kill these egos, but keep those other egos. Right? They're all from the same external force. If we want to realize the being, the ultimate reality, the truth, one has to first recognize the origin of all that is good and commit to it. Otherwise, our mind will always lie to us and manipulate us again with subtle temptations towards the external force. So this is related to repentance. When we repent, it means that the causes of our errors are no longer active. There's no more identification with it. And also, we're no longer the same person who committed the previous mistakes. No need to be identified with the past. It's okay, No need to be identified with it. In this way, dissolving ego is dissolving karma. If we fell into the same mistake again, for example, if we made an effort to stop doing a thing, but then we fell into it, maybe we thought we really overcome it and we had a certain level of happiness, but we fell into it again, then it wasn't the full amount, or wasn't the true, full, correct remorse or repentance just yet. Still making progress, but not just yet. It wasn't maybe sincere enough, or we lacked enough meditation in order to really see it fully, see the full reality of it. And when we have a lot of guilt and shame still, it generally shows that the ego is still active, because we still sense the possibility of falling into it again. It's still there, just a little bit. So we need a lot of patience and perseverance. So true repentance, true change, has the ingredients of profound comprehension of our mistakes, profound realization of our particular nature, of our being and purpose and existence, right? And this is very important to reflect on, because when you start to understand yourself, your particular nature, who you are, your particular conditioning of consciousness, like I said before, our essence has its particular colors, then we start to understand our essence more too. True repentance has the full release of the attachment to the error or the ego, the sin. And we also gain a new level of self-remembrance. Right? Throughout the day, we need to remember ourselves if we don't want to fall into the old patterns. So this means we get a new sense of self. It might not be the full essence, but we get a new level of being, a new acquired sense of our being, of our essence. And that's great, We have more beauty, have more harmony in our life. So in this way, as Krishna said, Krishna symbolizing the Christ in the Hindu tradition, the fire of knowledge, or the fire of self-knowledge, burns all karma to ashes. And as Master Samael said, when a superior law or a superior way of being transcends the inferior law, the superior law washes away the inferior law. So it's important here in this work on dissolving the ego, not resisting the self-observation of our errors, our egos. And I think a lot of people fall here Because when we start to observe the errors, it can be painful. And this is it relates to what I said before about conscious suffering. Doesn't need to be painful, but we just have this part of us that still resists. It wants to ignore. It wants to go back to old ways and habits. When we resolve ourselves to dissolve a psychological error, then when it appears in daily life, and it absolutely will, again, you just know that it will. Don't think that, okay, I'm never gonna do this again, and the temptation isn't gonna come back. No, it will, absolutely, because the psychic entity will come back. It's hungry. It needs to be fed. Right? Then we shouldn't resist when it comes. Don't try to not face it, because if we do resist it, it's like we're being manipulated back into ignorance, into mechanical ways of being. Just have to, when the entity visits us, basically, we have to just look at it, see it, We have to persevere and be patient. The resistance itself is another ego taking over to blind us from true self-observation. Okay. So we have to resolve ourselves to see anything, see it all, without any identification. You can even affirm to yourself, I do not identify with this mental representation that is being shown to me, that is being impressed, an impression fed to me within myself. If we're taken over by so much guilt, shame, sadness, ignorance, distractions, addictions, while the ego we resolve to dissolve is active, then we're resisting it. We're resisting really seeing it. Have to have some stillness and breathe, maybe, and just see. Yes, it's painful. I'd say it's an illusory pain, but it's still pain, nonetheless. All pain is ultimately illusory. And then just see it, okay? So this is why conscious suffering is necessary. In this way, true self-observation is the same as conscious suffering. The ability to accept the negative states of our psyche. And of course, the paradox is that this releases the suffering. It's a paradox. Most people suffer because they don't want to face their suffering. But if you face the suffering goes. Right? So we have to meditate, observe, and aspire ourselves. Become aspirants of consciousness. To understand the true causes of our ego. Self-inquire, ask questions. Where did you come from? Where is this from? Maybe sometimes in meditation, in the astral, we start to recall childhood trauma, something like this, It can be very shocking and surprising to really see actually the true origins of our ego and the reasons for our negative behaviors and feelings and beliefs and etc. Can be very surprising. Be ready to be surprised. Because usually people think they know themselves and say, oh, I'm like this because of this, without doing any internal work. And actually, if they did the internal work, they would see that they were totally mistaken. And that actually their trauma, the reason for their trauma is totally something else. Something much more profound. Something much more life-changing for them. Something that can help them to actually release it because they understand it with the true causes. Okay. So we have to see how, everything we have this unconscious life. How all our ego keeps us blind, asleep, stops us accessing, awaken consciousness, understanding the purpose of our life, and having authentic spiritual happiness, free from suffering. So I'd like to finish here with a mystical exercise from Master Samael's book, The Igneous Rose. It's an affirmation of force to give you strength in those moments, to overcome and triumph in your psychological battles, the battle of the two centers of gravity. And it goes like this. And as he says, before he gives the practice, when the mind pursues you with perverse representations of hatred or passion, envy or selfishness, speak to the mind as follows. And this is another important point. Understanding that we are not our mind, and that also we can treat our mind like a child and to talk to it and teach it sometimes. It doesn't have to be external. People might think we're a bit weird. You can if you want, if you don't mind what people think of you. But this is mostly an internal process. So speak to the mind, We have to feel as though we are the master of our mind, not the mind controlling us. Not to fall below our thoughts and emotions of the mind, but to rise above it, to see it clearly, and let it understand that it's our servant. So speak to the mind as follows. Mental body. I do not accept this representation. Take it away from me. I do not accept this from you. You must obey me, because I am your Lord. Right? We're not talking from ego. When we say I, we're talking from the sense of our being. The innermost can control the mind, but only by means of willpower. There is no other way. So again, let us affirm our being. I am not the body. I am not desire. I am not the mind. I am not the willpower. I am not the consciousness. I am not even the intelligence. I am the innermost, the Christ, the being. I will break all the chains of the world. I am the living God. I am the being. I am life. I am the bread of life. I am the wine. Again, we are not saying, I am God. As we've been studying here, we know very well that we're full of ego. But in those moments of temptation, we need strength from God, and we need to feel union with God. The word religion coming from the word religare, which means union with divinity. Okay. When we affirm the majesty of the being, the igneous rose of our objective understanding glows within the blazing universal fire. It means if you have the strength to do that will, that effort, I can tell you, the spontaneous objective understanding, the light of self-knowledge comes spontaneously. The being, we have enough space within us for the being to illuminate us. So we have the Kabbalah diagram here. And as you can see here, right, you can do it in your own way too. I am not the body. I am not the physical body. I am not the vital body of my sexual energy. I am not the emotional astral body. I am not the mental body of my thoughts. I am not the causal body, right? I am the being, all up here, the Divine Mother, the Christ, the absolute, the ultimate reality, all of divinity, all the aspects of divinity that are within us. And so you can start to understand here how I said at the beginning here, the causal body is superior to the mental and the astral. Because here we have the ultimate reality at the top, and this God reality unfolds itself down into the material world. So as you can see here, it goes down, right? The higher it is, the superior it is. So we need to work in all of these spheres, but the higher we can work, the better. And if we can work at the causal level, this is great. To become a causal man, not an emotional man, right? An emotional person just loving God all the time and just thinking that loving God will help them. No. And thinking or becoming an intellectual person, studying the Bible, studying teachings. That's not just relying on that and thinking that will take us to the liberation and awakening of consciousness doesn't work too. Right? And just practicing sexual alchemy, white tantra, thinking just doing that will save us. No. Right? We need all of it. We need to work in harmony with all of this while also not identifying with all of it too. And of course, we don't live here. We don't even live in the third dimension. So a lot of pseudo-spirituality states that we live in the third dimension and we're moving to the fifth dimension. That's not true. We live in the lower fifth dimension, the infrared, the shadow of the fifth dimension. We live in the subconsciousness, the unconsciousness. In other words, hell, infradimensions. We're working to we're doing those practices to meditate, to feel in the present moment, to hear the sounds outside around us. We're starting to put our consciousness back in the physical body, in the world of the four elements. And then when we start to transmute our energy, then we start to work with the vital body, and then we can start with the astral, the mental. And you can kind of see this line here is essentially the centrifugal force going downwards. The river of life consuming us, going down and down and down. This work of awakening consciousness is about going up, going back, swimming back up the river, going against the current. So, some conclusions here as we finish, and then we'll go into our Q&A. If we're not dissolving the ego, then we're not following true spirituality. True change and transformation only comes about by that. It's not enough to just see the ego, or see this or that ego, and say, oh, I have this and that. That's not enough. We have to have remorse and resolve ourselves to remove it, to dissolve it, to transform it, transmute. We must want self-transformation. Ask and you shall receive. Right? That's a big thing here. A lot of people are in these teachings, but it's like they've never said to themselves, to their inner divinity, they've never sat down and prayed and meditated inside, I want this, I want that. It's okay to feel it, but when we actually say it with our word, that's powerful. Right? Knock on the door and it will open. Ask and you shall receive. So it's all about getting the heart right, the center of your gravity. Remember yourself. Anytime you feel the gravity of being consumed by life, getting lost in the world, stay with that. Stay remembering yourself. Otherwise, you'll do actions that will make yourself suffer eventually. You'll feel old negativities. You fall into old traps. We all know this. It's all about fully committing to the awakening of your consciousness.